I want to talk to you about a movie I just watched with my family last night, The Shack. If you haven't seen it, you should go see it. It's on Netflix right now, and it's a really poignant, powerful message about a lot of things, whether you're religious or not, but it speaks to the presence of divine love in our life loud and clear. So, this is a 2017 film. It's based on a book written by William P. Young, and the theme is loss, healing, and the way of God. Why does God let bad things happen to good people? Um, all right, so let's just kind of go through the basics of the movie. It's let's see. It's a story of a man. His name is Mac, and he, in a devastating manner, loses his youngest daughter. And then one day he's going through all this mourning and suffering and the aftermath of this tragic loss. His daughter was actually abducted, and they never found her, presumably murdered by a serial killer guy. Anyway, that's a main plot, but it's also a side plot. One day, while he's going through this tragedy, he receives a mysterious invitation in the mailbox that invites him to go back to the shack where this event happened, right? And understandably, this is really kind of scary to him. He doesn't know what he's going to find there. But rather than facing judgment or condemnation at the shack, he encounters God, or the representation of God, right? And this is an opportunity for him to heal, process these wounds that he's grieving from, and move on. But what really I want to talk about, there are lots of topics we could go into, but I want to talk about the striking and kind of profound, but also really personable way they represented God in this movie. They call God Papa, and God first appears as a nurturing, motherly figure, a middle-aged woman played by Octavia Spencer. And actually, that same lady is somebody that Mac had met earlier in his life in a time of suffering. But at this time in his life, a motherly figure is what he needs to move forward. He doesn't need an authoritarian figure, a father figure. He's actually had trauma with fathers in the past, his own father. And so he needs some warmth. He needs some compassion. He needs a maternal presence to help kind of break down these walls of protection and grief that he's hiding behind. And this, to me, this really beautifully illustrates how divine love can meet us in whatever form we need, and in the form that we can handle and most readily accept at the time. For Mac at this point, it's a tender, non-judgmental, playful, loving force that begins to open his heart. And he also meets Jesus, a representation of Jesus, who, he's a Christian in this movie. And so there's, God the Father, who's Papa, and who's this motherly figure. And then Jesus, who's just like a chill guy, who's his friend, right? Jesus is like his buddy. He just wants to kind of be a good friend to him. And that Mac really needs that. He needs somebody that can talk to him and understand him. And kind of, at one point he says, what, how come you're so relatable? And he says, well, I'm not a god. I'm a human too, or whatever. I guess he says he's a god, but says I'm a man too. He's really relatable. And I think that's important. I mean, that's the Jesus that we teach a lot of times, but it's also not. Whether you're a Christian or not, Jesus, the historical Jesus, sometimes we teach as kind of this figure that is different than other people. But I think if you've ever seen shows like The Chosen, you see this human-like Jesus who's really just a friend. He's a good guy to hang out with, and you can feel that love in this movie. And then there's the Holy Ghost, the other representation of God in this movie, and that's represented by this woman who's kind of ethereal, kind of mystical, has an ability to, open up his mind, help him see beyond the scope of what he's used to seeing with these profound insights and kind of changes in perspective of reality. And she controls like the growth of the earth and things like that. Um, and then it even gets further than that, where Papa first shows up as this middle-aged woman, and that helps Mac to open up. But later in the movie, Papa shows up as kind of a more stern, strong, fatherly figure who helps him on a difficult part of his healing journey. And he says, even when he shows up, says, "How come you're different?" And he says, "Well, you need a father for this part of your journey." And I think that, to me, like, at first I was like, okay, God shows up in these different forms. But then when God shifts forms to show up from as a mother and then a father, to me that was profound. And that spoke to me because I know in my life God has shown up in so many different ways, whether that's in the form of another person or some force in the universe. But God is there when I've needed him, her, it, that force in my life the way that I need him. And we see this throughout different religions. So for example, in Hinduism, you've got Vishnu, who can take on so many different avatars, Krishna, Rama, or others. He appears to the world in whatever form that the world needs. If they need a destroyer, show up as a destroyer. And in Buddhism, we see this too. There's a bodhisattva who comes in the form of compassion and manifests in different forms to help bring presence or bring nurturing presence, or other times as a protector, kind of a violent force. And then even in Christianity, you've got the Trinity, and whatever your belief is, there's different elements to the one God, right? It can show up in different forms at different times in different ways. These stories really help me to connect with God, whether you're religious or not. You can see that force in the universe. There's the presence of the divine is there. That could be, like I said earlier, in the form of another human being, or in nature, or in connecting with our inner self in a way that it helps us to heal and overcome the struggles of life and understand who we are in the world and our identity. But this movie really helps to frame that in a way. It really is. It's the guy's Christian, but the movie is not a Christian movie per se, because it violates all sorts of biblical doctrines, if you look at it, which to me was beautiful, because they're transcending common religion. They're saying, even at one point Jesus says, "Well, we don't need religion. Like, religion is kind of just for humans. Like, God doesn't need religion," right? Ultimately, I would encourage you to go watch this movie, read the book. I haven't read the book. I'd like to go read the book, put that on my Audible list. It really speaks to how the divine can manifest in our lives in the way that we need it, not the way we want it, but God shows up how we need. And sometimes that can be a surprise to us, but oftentimes, if we're looking for it, we can see that divine hand in our lives, opening the way, or healing our hearts, or bringing love and presence to us so that we can connect with other human beings and build these bridges of love and unity that we're here to create. So yeah, anyway, go watch it. It's on Netflix right now. It's an awesome film. I'd encourage everybody to spend some time with it. If you have seen it and you have other thoughts on it or other insights, leave them down in the comments. I want to hear, we can have a conversation about it. There's so much to unpack. We could talk about this for hours, but yeah, if you have seen it, let's chat. Let's hear what you have to say. Also, you can subscribe, and we'll talk about more things like this, other media, or also just elements of how the divine interacts in our lives and how we can find meaning and fulfillment in that process and in that presence. That's what Prometheus Path is all about. We'll talk about kind of the details of what Prometheus path really is and how we can get on that path and take advantage of some of the lessons that are out there in the mythology and the religious culture and world. Anyway,